Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. What a privilege to be the first speaker in the afternoon in this very important two-day event. To our translators into French and to our sign language translators, give me a wave if I'm going too swiftly for you. Okay? For everyone else, my name is Stephanie Nixon. I am very pleased to talk to you today about the HIV Health and Rehabilitation Survey, which I will call the CIHRRC. And this is a survey that's going to be conducted right across Canada, first in English. So what I'm talking about today is the effort in English, and ideally a second phase in French. This survey hasn't started yet, but there's been an extensive amount of piloting work that has been done. And so the purpose of the presentation I'm about to give you is to share with you some of the lessons that have been learned from piloting the HIV Health and Rehabilitation Survey, or CIHRRC, with adults living with HIV in Canada. And so to tell you about this, I'm going to break up my presentation into three sections. First, I'm going to tell you about what the CIHRRC is. Then I'm going to tell you who the CIHRRC is. And then I'm going to get to the meat of the presentation, which is what did we learn from the pilot. So first, what is this CIHRRC? And conveniently, whenever I use CIHRRC, if you forget what it stands for, the words are in the logo that's hidden somewhere on the slide. So here's the backstory. We heard all morning about how as adults live longer with HIV, many are facing all kinds of challenges, physical challenges, a diverse range of social challenges, all kinds of psychological challenges, stemming from HIV itself, from the consequences of treatment, so it's the bad news of treatment, and from all the comorbidities that may go along with HIV or with aging. So from all of those medical diagnoses, there is just this sort of wide array of challenges that can arise. And how might we think about those challenges? There are lots of ways to think about it, and depending on your disciplinary orientation or the way you see the world, you'll think about it in different ways. There's one way of thinking about these challenges that folks at CIHRRC and others have found extremely useful, and that's to understand these challenges within a particular conception of disability. So I'm going to use the term disability, but I'm going to use it to mean something specific. In the CIHRRC, we're understanding disability very broadly as any symptoms and impairments. So that's anything at the level of a body part or an organ. It also includes difficulty with day-to-day activities. So this is something that involves the level of the whole body. Our understanding of disability also includes challenges to social inclusion, all kinds of challenges to social inclusion, depending on any form of oppression, and also includes the uncertainty and worrying that may go on for an individual when thinking about the future, when you're living longer with HIV. So this is a broad understanding of disability. Related to this conception of disability is a particular conception of rehabilitation. There's lots of ways of defining rehabilitation. The way that rehabilitation is being understood in the context of the CIHRRC is, in short, anything that helps with disability. And the language that we're using in this definition of rehabilitation is drawn from a particular conceptualization that comes from the World Health Organization that talks about any service or provider that addresses or prevents impairments, so that's the body part, activity limitations, the whole body, or what the WHO calls participation restrictions, and that's the individual in her society or environment. So if we think about rehab and disability this way, we can see that not only is it important, but that the nature and the extent of disability, of rehabilitation services use, so any of those things that would address disability, and the broad creative living strategies or ways of coping with these challenges among adults living with HIV in Canada is not known. So we've come to think these ideas are important, but we actually don't know what the nature and extent of them is across the country. So how might we come to know that? The good news is That's what the HHRS is designed to do. So very specifically, the point of this is to establish a comprehensive profile of disability experienced by people living with HIV in Canada, and to determine how contextual factors like comorbidities, rehab services use, and living strategies influence the disability experience. That's the point of the survey. So this is an online survey. It's cross-sectional, meaning one time. It's self-administered, meaning that the participant sits down by herself or himself at a computer and administers this survey independently using what's called a modified Dillman approach. That's research code for how often reminders and thank yous will be sent out. It's for adults living in Canada who speak and read English and who can use computer and can get an email address. That's one of the links in. And we're using what we're calling a community engaged approach. So this is only possible if it's done in very comprehensive partnership with a whole range of collaborators and knowledge users, which is again a particular research speak for ASOs, community-based organizations, people that do real work on the front lines. And here's what's in the survey. So 6 categories within the survey. The first is a whole set of questions about disability itself. So to try to establish the level of disability. And the way this is being asked is through a measure called the HIV Disability Questionnaire, sometimes called the HDQ, that's been developed by Kelly and colleagues over much time. So that's one section. Another section is about rehab services use. And we're very interested in how many, and it may be small, how many are using OT, PT, SLP, so occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech-language pathology. But when it comes to rehab, most people, arguably, are seeking rehab services elsewhere in more accessible places, including complementary and alternative therapies and the whole array of services that are available in the community. So rehabilitation services use is inclusive of all of those. We're interested in comorbidities. We're interested in living strategies, which is an idea that we're framing as the behaviors and attitudes and beliefs that people adopt to deal with living with HIV. We're interested in social support and stigma and demographic characteristics. So how are we going to make this work? This is a big, big enterprise. So again, the only way it's going to work is if you have on board from the start as members of the team these collaborator and knowledge user organizations, and they will be the ones that send out the invitation to participate using this modified Dillman approach, which means an initial invitation goes out after a set amount of time, a second note goes out that says thank you if you did this, and if not, there's still time, and then a third that does the same, and then a final. And we expect that it'll take about 30 or 40 minutes. It's housed on a Canadian software system called Lime Survey. And to get the answers that we want to get, the power calculations suggest that we will need to send out over 3,500 invitations to secure 1,400 complete surveys. 1,400 complete 30 to 40 minute surveys. So that is an enormous task. Who would undertake that task, right? And if you're going to try and make that work, you don't just dive in. You know what you do? You do a pilot. So that was what is the HHRS. Let me tell you about who is the HHRS, and then I'll get on to this pilot to tell you what we did and how it's helped shape the process. I expect that the writing is small for most of you to be able to see, but the message here is that there's a lot of people involved in this. And these are people right across the country. In fact, there's 3 categories of engagement. Down the left side of your screen are researchers. Down the right side of your screen are knowledge users. And on my third slide are the collaborators, are the organizations that are involved. And so by show of hands, can you please raise your hand if you're part of the HHRS team? Thank you for the opportunity for me to present today, to make it sound like this is my work. It's not. I'm one member of this big, big, diverse team. I'm not even the leader of this team. It's actually Kelly's project. She's been the one that's been driving it. But it's been extraordinary to be engaged with such a comprehensive, diverse team geographically and from different sectors and disciplines. So that's the who. Now on to the show. What did we learn in the pilot? So a pilot is where you try this out to see how it's going to work so that you can make it even better when it comes time to launch fully. And how did we do the pilot? Well, we started at the end of 2011 and into early 2012 by trying out a draft version of the survey and then afterwards conducting some interviews with the people who had done it. We learned so much during that time that we decided to do a second pilot. So let me tell you about these two pilot phases. In the first one, for the survey implementation, we used the process that we're going to use when it's time to roll out this whole thing this fall, and had the collaborator and knowledge user organizations email a number of clients inviting them to participate. We used a modified version of that Dillman. And then there was a telephone interview that was about 30 minutes long where we sought feedback on how well the process worked for them, how well they thought it captured disability, etc. And people were given a token of appreciation for this. Who took part in the first survey? There were 56 people who were invited to participate. At the end of the day, of those who viewed the survey, 16 completed the survey. 17 provided feedback during the interviews, and of those 17, 14 had done the whole survey, 3 had just started it. So what you're about to hear is based on a pilot of 16 full surveys and 17 interviews. And who was it that was actually involved in this initial part of the pilot? It was 3/4 men from 34 to 63 years old, 2/3 diagnosed before 96, all on treatment from 5 provinces across the country, and noting that 1/3 rated their health status as very good and another over 1/3 as good, with a whole collection of comorbidities. So it's a particular look to the people who participated in this sample. And what did we learn? We learned that 2/3 of the people took about 30 to 45 minutes to complete the survey. So we were about right with how long it took. And the feedback that we got was very consistent to what the research team had been battling with over time, was that a great strength of the survey is how comprehensive it is, how detailed it is. But a drawback is how long it is, and that it's too wordy, and yet people had really struggled to figure out how to pare it down. But there were a whole series of ways that we could tweak it to make it better. And so we, and when I say we, I mean Kelly and Kem, did, and we ran a second pilot. And so this time we just ran the survey implementation, very similar to the first round, except we didn't do the interviews this time. The response rate, again, was similar, and the demographic characteristics across the board were quite similar to the first pilot. And what we learned at the end of the whole pilot process were a collection of strengths and a collection of areas for improvement. So I'm going to tell you about the strengths, and then I'll tell you about the improvements, and we'll finish off by talking about next steps. So why was this such a good idea? It was extraordinary in terms of refining the survey instrument and in refining the recruitment process. So we weren't just trialing the instrument, we were trialing the whole process. All kinds of good new techniques and tips came back in collaboration between the knowledge users and the central team to figure out how to make this process work even more efficiently. The good news is the Lime survey software worked well, the participants engaged well, and we were able to pilot it right across the country. But there were a whole range of areas that are still areas for improvement that are being tweaked as we speak. So we're continuing to try and make the language more straightforward. The Dillman steps worked so well. Every time a reminder was sent out, there was a surge in people engaging in the survey. And so we're actually going to add a 4th step, a 4th reminder. There have been different strategies that have arisen to try and mitigate the burden that this places on the community-based organizations. You know, those organizations, for the most part, are stretched already before engaging in this kind of process. So what are the efficiencies that can be found to make it easier for all of those groups to participate? And so here's what comes next. For us, all those people that raised their hand, Kelly did a great job presenting some of the lessons more broadly for research at a conference recently, and there's a paper under review. All of the survey revisions are underway, and there's a plan for a launch this fall. We have to go back through ethics at 4 different universities before then, so wish us luck. But the intention is to get this off the ground in 2013. What are the next steps for you? You might not have known, there are next steps for you. This is one giant cell job to try and get you on side with viewing this as an important exercise so that when the launch does happen, and you will hear about it, because word is going to come up all over the place, that you'll hear about it and that you'll spread the word. Just spread the word. I know about that survey. This is actually a useful exercise, and it's worth looking at. If you're with an organization and you think that what this survey is seeking to do is in your interest or is consistent with the mandate of your group, then we invite you to talk to either Kelly and Kim if you'd like to become part of the recruitment network. And by recruitment network, we mean working with any of those hubs that we have across the country now to help disseminate the word about this survey being available once the launch finally comes. And so if you'd like more information, you know who to go to. We are extremely thankful to the participants who participated in the pilot, and especially to Nicole Gervais, who conducted the interviews, and to our friends at CIHR who have been funding this all along the way. And with that, I'll close. Thank you.